Welcome to our July 2024 meeting of the Coordinated Land Use and Transportation Planning Task Force. Thank you all for joining us. We developed the task force to provide a forum for North Texas local governments to discuss best practices relating to coordinated land use and transportation plans and policies and progress. So we hope you enjoy today's discussion and get something out of it. We are recording this meeting, and the recording will be posted on our website along with the presentation slides for you to have as a resource. If you have any questions or comments at any time, as Travis mentioned, feel free to enter those into the chat box. We'll also have a few minutes after each presentation to take any burning questions that you have related to the presentation, and then we will also finally have some time at the end of the presentations for you to share any additional questions or thoughts you have during the discussion. Next slide, please. So today's meeting is the third of our 2024 task force meetings. We have one more scheduled for October 21st, and that schedule is available on our website, along with, of course, the meeting recording and the slides and other information. Next slide, please. So to start today, we'll have some local updates from NCT-COG, and then we'll move on to our theme for today, which is transit-supported land uses and affordable housing. We've got some presentations from City of Dallas, City of Austin, and City of Fort Worth. So we're looking forward to a great discussion, and then we'll have our panel discussion, and we'll have some announcements. Next slide. All right, so we have two local updates, and the first one we'll hear from Kathy Yu here at NCT-COG about our Regional Transit Onboard Survey. Take it away, Kathy.
Hi. Today I want to talk to you about the 22-23 North Central Texas Regional Onboard Survey. Next slide. The purpose of the survey is to understand who's riding transit and how they use it. This information is used by transit planners in designing the transit system to match the needs of the users and used specifically for route analysis and service planning. It's also used by NCT-COG to update the regional travel model, which is used to support regional long-range transportation planning. We also need the survey to satisfy Federal Transit Authority needs. We collect recent travel pattern data to be used in applications for FTA grants, where the last regional transit survey took place in 2014. We also use it to meet the Title VI civil rights requirements per the FTA guidance. Next slide. This survey was a collaborative effort between NCT-COG, DART, DCTA, and Trinity Metro. We combined also to do this survey in 2014 as well, and we tried to keep these two efforts very consistent. This survey include fixed routes, 154 across these agencies, which amounted to about 173,000 ridership at that time. And we also included some mobility on demand, including 40 zones. That also included Arlington transportation, and it covered a ridership at that time of almost 9,000 ridership. Next slide. The data collection aimed to get 10% of the weekday ridership on all fixed routes. This includes local and express bus, commuter rail, light rail, streetcar, and trolley. We also aim to capture 10% of weekday mobility on demand. The survey took place between September 2022 and May 23, where we surveyed DCTA and Trinity Metro in fall 22 and DART and TRE in spring 23. We conducted the survey using as onboard face-to-face interviews, where the survey instrument was a tablet PC. Randomly selected riders were asked to participate, and we also had 50% of our surveyors were bilingual, so we can try to capture responses from as many people as we could. In the end, we collected just under 33,000 completed surveys on fixed routes, as well as over 1,500 surveys on mobility on demand. Next slide. So what are the questions we were trying to capture? What we were trying to do was to capture the concept of a one-way trip. This was where we were where did you start your trip? Where did you end your trip? And all the different places in between. When we did the start point, we were starting with the origin. What was the location and what was the place type? And when we're talking about places, we're talking about, it could be home, work, shopping, eat out, and we had 17 different categories of that. On the other end, we tried to capture what the destination is, what was the location and the place type. And then we started across the trip. First, we asked for the mode of access. How did you get from your origin to the first transit vehicle? And then when you're on transit, what were all the different vehicles you used? Bus routes, rail lines, and this included any transfers and boarding and alighting locations. We also asked the mode of egress. Once you finished transit, how did you get to your destination? And for all of the surveys, we recorded the home location because not all trips include a home end on there. Next slide. In addition to the one-way trip, we also captured person information, age, gender, race, ethnicity, worker and student status, disability, language spoken at home, and whether they're a resident or a visitor. But we also wanted to know the households they are a part of, the household income, and number of persons in the household, number of workers in the household, and registered vehicles. We also had a bunch of other questions, very detailed questions about fare and payment, trip planning, transit use or frequency, trip frequency, and wait time were amongst these. And overall, we were working to have the same questions and almost the same response options for each of the agencies. So we could query the entire region as a whole. And again, we also tried to keep this consistent with the questions we asked in 2014. So now that we know what the questions are, let me show you a few of the compiled responses we had on the fixed route survey. Next slide. So we're going to talk about productions, which is a little bit of a change. The production type of location is either the home end of the trip or the origin. 91% of the people had a home end for their trip. So they started or ended their trip at home. After that, 2% was the highest thing with the workplace. But otherwise, really, that remaining 9% is split across 16 different categories. So overwhelmingly, home was the production end or part of every single trip. But then we can look at the other side, the attractions side, which is the non-home end or the destination. Next slide. 47% of the people were going to their workplace. Another 38% are kind of captured by the next four categories. 11% were going to the college university as a student. 8% were making social visits. 7% were going to shopping locations, and another 7% were going to like personal business locations for personal business, such as a bank or a post office. And in general, the survey will capture this information for all the different categories that are listed here. Now that we understand what types of locations people are going for productions and attractions, we can actually look at where these are located. Next slide. So these two maps are using the same scale, the same coloring. But on the left side, the map shows where trips are produced from. And on the right side, we see where trips are attracted to. On the left map, we see that trips are produced all over the region. We cover 11 counties, but as you see, they do get darker, which is more concentrated, more dense in the center counties, Collin, Dallas, Denton, and Tarrant. On the right side, we show the trip attraction locations. As far as not focusing on those center counties, we only see a little bit in Wise, Ellis, and Rockwall, but otherwise we are getting a little bit more, the locations are a little bit tighter, fewer, and they're really focused again on those four core counties. But this just gives you an idea of all the home locations on the production side and all of the places people are going to on the right. Beyond the one-way trip, we can look at some other information, including about the household. Next slide. So this shows you information about household income. The orange bars represent the households, the 2022-23 survey, and the blue bars represent the Census American Community Survey for 2022. From the orange bars, we see that 57% of boardings came from households with an income of less than $35,000, and 75% came from households with less than 50,000 in income. But according to the ACS, households with less than 50 income is actually only represents 29% of households in the same area. So this is just some of the data you can gather, or how you can use some of the data from the survey. We also can delve into the individuals. If we go to the next slide, we can see about the boardings by age. From this slide, we see that 52% of boardings were done by those 18 to 24, and almost about 70%, or just over 70%, were done for people of age 18 to 44. We should note that we did not survey people who were under 16, so that's a little bit of a skew there. Next slide. Unfortunately, we don't have time to show you all of the information contained in our survey, but if you search on NCTCOG under Travel Survey Reports, our full report is shown there, and we have all details about methodology, data collection, cleaning, and we have a table on each of the major questions in the survey that can be viewed. And so we hope you check that out. Next slide. But if you have any questions about this presentation or about the survey, feel free to contact me, kyu@nctcog.org.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. That's always really great information. Thank you for sharing that.
Sean, just have a quick
yes.
question for Kathy
Mhm.
while she's on the meeting. So Kathy, a lot of the stats were for the total, all the modes, all the region, correct?
Yes.
And so if one of our cities on the call wanted to look at, say, one corridor like the text rail or a particular sub area of the region, you guys could help them look at sort of who is using transit in their area, right?
Yes, we could.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that because I know, having looked at the data, I'm going to show a little slice of it in some slides later, that there's a lot of ways you can slice it out to look at particular areas as well. Just want to highlight that for everyone.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Travis. All right, we've got one more local update, kind of continuing on the data resources theme here. We'll hear from Donna Coggeshall here at NCTCOG as well. She's going to talk about the NCTCOG demographics forecast.
Good afternoon. My name is Donna Coggeshall, and I am from the Research and Information Service Department. I participated on a team that developed the 2050 demographic forecasts. Right now, they are preliminary, and I'll talk a little bit about those. I do have one of my other staff online here, Mark Folden. Mark is responsible for the development and the actual running of the demographic models. So Mark and I are on the team, along with some folks in the transportation department, that have been working on this for the last actually several years. So I'll go through that. Next slide, please. If you're not familiar with our forecast, this is something that we develop to be used mostly for the mobility plan. I know it gets used for other things, but the primary purpose is to feed the mobility plan. And the current forecast was last adopted in February of 2022. That was for the year 2045. Next slide, please. The forecast we're working on now, previous one, the one working on right now is for 2050. So it is 5 years more than the previous one. And it is something that will be at the traffic transportation analysis zone level. So that's the geography and that the numbers will be displayed on, and it will include projections for households, population, and employment for the 12 counties in the MPA at the transportation analysis zone level. Next slide, please. Here are the numbers that kind of give the overview of the totals. These are, we call regional controls. These are really the guiding numbers for the processes. We've got a variety of models that we use that break these big numbers down into smaller geographies, and we use a variety of geographies. But overall, for the 12 county metropolitan planning area, we anticipate by 2050 a little over 4 million households, 12.3 million people, and 8.7 million jobs. And you can see the difference there from our base year data, and that is data that we developed. And you can see the change in what we're anticipating over the next, 30 years. Next slide, please. So I mentioned we do have a variety of models that do different things. One of the things that we do is we actually develop some inputs that we call our small area estimates. We have to sum those up to, break those down into even smaller geographies. We run a variety of models and then we sum all that up. But in those processes, we develop a lot of these data sets. And like I said, we also run a lot of models. And one of the important steps in this process is what we call local review. So next slide, please. So the local review process is the opportunity for stakeholders to view the data and to provide input about where either we've missed something in the base data or there's places the model has not captured activity that has occurred or that is imminent and certain to occur. So we ask locals to please take a look at the data and let us know any places that we can make adjustments so that we can make sure that the final figures, the final projections are reflective of either what has happened or what is imminent. Next slide, please. This is our approximate timeline. We spent a couple years developing the inputs and also the models as part of that process and determining those control totals that I showed you. We've spent about 6 months, and Mark's been doing this, running those models. And now we're at the point where we have sent the data out for local review, and that will be going on for the next month or so. Then we'll get the review information from the stakeholders, and we'll incorporate that and finalize the numbers. We anticipate having final numbers to take to our the COG executive board for approval sometime late fall, early winter. I want to make you aware, and I don't have a slide on this, but we did present yesterday to the Surface Transportation Technical Committee. There's a much longer presentation. It goes into detail. It's got a lot of maps. It's got other information about the forecast and the process. If you're interested in looking at that, you can go to the Council of Governments website and you can find the Surface Transportation Technical Committee page and then look for the most recent meeting. It was yesterday. It was July 17th. And the slides are available on that location. The other thing I want to let you know, if you'll go to the next slide, please. I think I have my contact information up here. I do. Okay, so I'm Donna, and there's my email address. If you are a regional stakeholder and did not receive an email from me this morning or from us this morning about the local review, and you do want an opportunity to participate in local review, please send me an email and I will make sure that you are included in that. We very much need stakeholder input in this process. It's an important part to make sure that we can have the best forecast we can. Thank you. Why 29?
Thank you so much, Dawn.
I'm sorry, I see a question there. Why 29, not census 2020? When we started this process, the only data available, the most current, was for 2019. It takes us several years to build these input data sets. So we clearly, by the time census 2020 data became available, we do have that. And nice thing about having that is we can use that as one of our checks. But we did not have that data available when we started the development of the input data sets.
Great, thank you, Donna. And
Other
I'm going to
questions?
drop,
Okay.
that was the only question in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions for either of our local update speakers real quick from the audience? All right, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to that STAC meeting that Donna referred to with the longer demographics presentation on there in the chat for you, if you want to take a look at that. And then now I will pass it over to Travis. We're going to go into our main theme presentations.
Thanks, Sean. Hopefully y'all are all seeing the transit supported land uses and affordable housing slide now. So I'm Travis Liska, principal planner here at the North Central Texas Council of Governments, and I'll be leading us through this panel conversation on this topic. And I'm going to bring up our 4 external speakers here in a minute. But first, I want to sort of kick off the conversation with some of the regional context. So why this topic? why talk about affordable housing and transit? As we know in our region and across the country, housing is getting more and more expensive and difficult for people to access. And as North Texas grows, so as Donna mentioned, they're doing the demographic forecast. And Donna, I don't believe she highlighted our projection, or maybe I missed it, of like 12 million by 2050 or more than 12 million. But we're gaining millions, potentially millions of people in the next few decades. So we do need to make sure that folks can access transit and try to get as many folks as we can to use that transit system to make sure our transportation system overall flows well. So this is a look at the national literature on why it's important to have affordable housing access to transit. So it increases ridership on overall, looking again at the national literature, when you have more affordable housing. Other regions have found that folks who are low and moderate income are using transit more. And I would say, looking at our onboard survey that Kathy mentioned, that's also true here in North Texas. Transit ridership helps people access opportunities such as jobs. It's important for making that accessible to everyone at different levels of society. And of course, folks who are able to access transit more frequently nationally who live around TODs are more likely to decrease their driving and increase public transit use, which helps us with issues like congestion and air quality. And then here's the literature cited if you want to check it out for yourself later on. Now, I already alluded to our North Texas onboard transit survey and its deep look at who is riding transit, who are the current users in that 2022-2023 snapshot that Kathy explained. And now she mentioned we were looking at sort of the transit trip, but also a lot of demographic information on the folks who are using this and how they're using the system. So just want to highlight a few statistics out of that. Overall, for all transit riders, around 63% of them have that household income of less than 50,000 a year. And when we look at our region's data on sort of housing affordability, looking at the Census American Community Survey, and I just pulled the 1-year ACS for the metropolitan statistical area, which includes our 12 counties plus one additional. So to afford rent or a mortgage as part of a homeowner, you would need to make beyond that 50,000 mark. And so our transit riders may be people who are having trouble paying for housing. And so putting that housing near transit is an important location factor. And then likewise, it's important to have walkable design and ensure we have the pedestrian facilities here, because as we see throughout the transit system, most people are accessing their transit vehicles by walk. So largely that data is coming though from access to bus stops, because of course you're not parking and riding at a lot of the bus stops. Majority of those are walk access. So we could also, just to highlight the capacity of the transit data, split this out for rail only trips and look at that access mode, which is something we'll do as we on our sustainable development team continue to analyze that data. So one more effort that we've got going here at the Council of Governments on our sustainable development team is sort of looking at that relationship of affordability and ridership as part of a host of other TOD ridership factors and TOD development indicators. So we have undertaken the difficult, I would say, task of identifying designated affordable housing projects around our rail stations in the region. So you can see here a draft map where we've tried to use the funding sources to identify those. In this list here, we've also got a long list of the sources we're looking at. We're not necessarily experts on affordable housing, so we'll probably be reaching out to some of you, our local stakeholders, to sort of get some feedback on this. But I just wanted to show you kind of the initial phase of this effort as we look at sort of what's driving ridership, where are the comparison factors, and land development indicators that indicate higher transit ridership. So that's something else that we are engaged on because it isn't a significant issue for our region. And so finally, I want to remind everyone that NCTCOG is your partner in funding projects that can support affordable housing. Transportation funds don't necessarily go to the vertical development. We can't necessarily fund the housing development necessarily, but transportation infrastructure such as pedestrian sidewalks, the sort of streetscape elements that go into that at one particular development back in our 2005-2006 call is one example of how we supported affordable senior housing in that case. Much more recently, in a much larger project, DART is redeveloping the park and ride at SMU Mockingbird Station. And to make that happen, they had to relocate the park and ride to an underground structure. COG helped them do that through some strategic funding swaps. And that's going to enable a development there that will have an affordable housing element. So while the Council of Governments is largely a transportation funding agency, we want to make sure that accessible, affordable housing is being located around our transit system to help the folks who need that access have that access. And so I mentioned that to queue up our next group of speakers. If there are, see we have some few questions. One question for me here in the chat. Will our affordable housing transit map be in a public dashboard? Yes, that's a goal of mine to get that posted along with other indicators, so some ACS demographics. We are also tracking just generally the development of TOD that's currently on our website, nctcog.org/TOD. I apologize for not having that link there, but this will be something that we'll make accessible. All right. So as I mentioned, I'm going to turn it over now to our external speakers to kind of talk about the mechanics behind in their places, how they are advancing affordable, accessible, transit accessible housing. And our first speaker, I think I have him on the phone here, is Aaron from the Dallas Housing Finance Corporation. So Aaron, I've got your slides pulled up if you're ready to go.
Yeah, I'm ready. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
All right, great. So Travis was nice enough to ask us to kind of present a couple of our projects, or this one in particular that's located next to a DART stop. And so this project is standard at Royal Lane. It was conceived several years ago, initially as a LUTTF kind of execution, but it was then switched to the PFC structure just so it wouldn't fall out of contract. There were some problems with the financing through the LUTTF route, and so it was lucky enough to be able to get executed through the PFC, and I guess we can advance it. The slides kind of go through and explain what the project is and what the general concept was. It's about 300 units. It's a site in the north part of Dallas, right near the DART station. It's literally steps from the DART station. And so through our PFC and our HFC as well, we're trying to spur investment in strategic areas, and this is one that's been, you know, it's been the subject of much discussion at City Hall. There's been several initiatives by City Council to go and do RFPs on several sites right near these DART stations and really utilize that land use synergy that will come with more density around these stops. And so I think the PFC and the HFC are tools that our municipalities can use to spur this development, especially in these particular areas where a market rate development might not be able to be financed conventionally. You can come in and use this as kind of a catalyst and get something financed through partnership with one of these corporations. So we can, I mean, just as an overview, this will be a project that looks just like a regular Class A market-driven project. It won't have any difference in terms of amenities and quality of build and everything that's something you would want to see in a nice apartment complex, but it will be restricted rent at about 50% of those units. And so you can see kind of the breakdowns there. 50% will be at market rate, 40 at 80% AMI, and 10% at 60. And so for us, this is a great way to get some development spurred right near those transit, I guess, hubs, so we can start to build out that network and really take advantage of this land use type of synergy. You can keep going here. Yeah, so here's the site in Northwest Dallas, kind of near the 635 and I-35 crosser right off of Royal Lane. We can keep going here. From this aerial overview, you can see it was a very long, kind of narrow site, but literally steps from that Royal Lane DART station, and just quite convenient if you're going to use the station to go downtown or any parts north. And so that'll be a great help to the residents when this is complete. It's still under construction right now, so we can move next slide here. Yeah, so here's the concept. Pretty basic, 4 buildings, but plenty of amenities. It's not your typical site with all of the buildings kind of spread out. These are all kind of clustered towards the center with the parking around it. Plenty of access both for vehicles as well as pedestrians. You have that. I know this site plan is kind of flipped, so north actually is on the right side of the map, but you can see there's 2 points of ingress, egress, and then 2 pools, just because we don't want to have people having to walk a quarter mile to go to the pool with their family and whatnot. I think sidewalks also were a big deal. They were installed along the Royal Lane frontage as well. We can get going, Travis. All right, so now you can see what it's looking like right now. These are pictures as of, I believe, July 1st. Yeah, right there on the tape. So this is looking at it from the north. You can see all the buildings kind of lined up here, but with those little courtyards that will provide amenities to all those residents. We can go to the next one. And again, from the opposite way here. So it's a very high quality construction. We were able to partner with one of our most active partners, LDG. They have quite a few units under construction and in service. They're one of the largest affordable housing developers in the country. Quite trusted. We were able to work with them to get this funding closed and done, and they've been one of our most successful and trusted partners. So that's another thing that's key is finding good people to work with who can stomach the somewhat laborsome processes that our governments have to go through to get them this funding, but have the capacity and the know-how to do that, and the persistence. Honestly, every project we do takes quite a bit of persistence. Yeah, again, the interior design, it looks just like any other market rate deal you have, with the appliances, with the countertops, the cabinetry, all the rooms, and all the furnishings. It's identical to what you would see in a fully market rate development. Again, the pool amenities, you'll have all the clubhouse, the business center, the gym, and everything there. You can keep going. All right, so nitty gritty on terms that the Dallas PFC, I guess this is kind of their standard term sheet. So it helps developers when they come to you and say, hey, can we do a PFC? How do we underwrite this? So it's good to have like a standard term sheet, just so you know that you're being consistent with everyone, not showing any favoritism. That helps the developers feel warm and fuzzy, like they're not getting the short end of the deal, but then also it helps them underwrite upfront more accurately. And so that's really the biggest That's the biggest, I guess, hurdle they have to jump through. We've seen a lot of deals that have problems getting that last $1 million, $2 million, $5 million into their capital stack so that they can actually get this done. And so the more accurate you can be with all of your upfront costs, the easier that makes for them. So, I mean, Dallas HF for PFC, they charge a $250,000 structuring fee, and then these annual payments are in the form of a lease. And so that's really based off of our financial advisor's kind of calculation. We take into account all of the taxes that would have been collected on the site, and then we have kind of a minimum return based on those foregone taxes. And if they can't hit that hurdle, it's kind of a good litmus test for the PFC board to say, well, maybe we need a little more affordability, or, you know, maybe we need to change around the deal a little more to make this worth our while. And so that's helped us. And so these payments will be coming in to the PFC on a yearly basis. And then in return, the PFC can take those funds and redeploy them out into the community for housing activity. And that's another income generator, in addition to all of the, you know, the non-tangible or non-measurable development that will come with adding, you know, 300 units in this certain area. Obviously, the neighborhood's going to get a bump. Hopefully, the DART ridership gets a bump. And so everything, you know, it works in tandem. It's all connected. And so the more focus we can have these developments, the greater effect we can have on the entire city as a whole, right? We can keep going. That might be the last slide, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Travis.
Oh, no, I was just say thanks, Aaron, for talking a little bit more about the PFC tool. And, you know, I, of course, as I indicated, am interested in how this is kind of emerging and increasing in frequency in our region. You know, I know the city of Louisville has a project in the pipeline on this. I think Plano Housing Authority also used PFC on a project. And, you know, so you mentioned your standard term sheet here. So naturally, I assume you guys are seeing more and more developers requesting use of PFC for affordable housing projects. Is that sort of a trend in the city of Dallas?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been probably, well, combined with the HFC, these two programs have probably been responsible for the majority of new affordable housing in the city over the last 4 years. I think we have over $2 billion worth of real estate just in the pipelines. And so that's everything under construction, you know, approved, and that's actually in operation. And so I would extend the HFC as well. PFC is kind of it's a buzzword in the real estate community and in the governmental community, but HFCs can do a similar type of structure and do pretty much the same thing. It's really just with a different kind of ownership setup, and those in the know on the call will know what I'm talking about. But sounds like I'm kind of blathering on legal structures, but what I really want to tell you is both can do similar things, right? But they've been both highly effective at doing it. And I think, you know, there's two ways to look at affordable housing, and it's, you know, you can fund it through a bond or, you know, extra tax, or, you know, try to rely on charitable or federal grants, or you can go the other way. So these are all excess funds that you're going to need to either tax from the citizens or find from some other source. Or
like y'all's TIF districts, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you can do it the opposite way and boost the capital stack from the bottom line and just reduce the operating costs through that tax exemption. And for me, it seems like a much more painless way to go about subsidizing housing. And often with these new developments, you know, the taxes foregone on an empty piece of land really aren't that much. And if it weren't for partnership with the HSC or the PSC, there wouldn't be a development anyways. And so in my mind, you're looking at something that wouldn't have existed but for this partnership. And so what you're giving up is paltry in comparison to what you're getting, in terms of, 300 extra units, a bunch of homes for citizens, and if it's well located, hopefully some really good amenities and, affordability, which is a crisis all over the country, right? So to me, that's kind of the gospel I've been preaching about these programs and the effectiveness that they have. And it's starting to catch on with the development community. My phone rings off the hook every single day to partner on either new developments or acquisitions using these legal structures and utilizing this tax exemption to implement affordability, not just around, DART sites, but everywhere in the city.
Yeah. And so on that topic of everywhere, what would you advise? Can your peer cities, can they encourage use of HFC and PFC, or is it just you wait for the developer to come forward? I know finding the land where it's politically feasible to do affordability is one question, but let's assume those sites are in play. Is there anything the cities can do to incentivize it, or is it, again, something you just kind of wait for your development partner to bring forward?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of different steps. Anytime you try to partner with an entity like us, you have to find the right partners who are willing to jump through the hoops that you need to. I mean, if it was easy, everyone would do it, right? But, that being said, the city of Dallas has tried to, promote these separate sites around the DART stations. We're talking with DART to do an RFP. Well, we've done an RFP that went out to the general public and developers to get some proposals on how to develop these sites around the DART stations. Now, in terms of just generally promoting PFC and HFC structures, I don't know if the city themselves have done much, but, us as staff, we go out and we, attend conferences. We talk in the development community. I'm active in several different boards, and we just try to get our name out there as a place where we want to get business done and where we have the know-how and, the desire to get something done. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. We want to do deals, and we want to provide benefit to the city and the citizens. And so I think people have been responsive and receptive to that, and the word is out, at least on our end, as to our ability to get something done. Now, again, there's always other factors involved. What's the political will for a particular site, or, how do your city processes contribute either to the detriment or the success of these? Those can be a bit trickier to navigate around. But, like I said, if you have good partners that are willing to be patient and that can work with you, you can usually get something done.
Great. Aaron, thanks for that advice for our sort of peer city staff on here. Got a couple of questions in the chat that I want to make sure we address real quick before we move on. So Mark asked, I believe this is in reference to the project, what was the total development cost and what was the PFC contribution? And I brought this slide back. I don't think it mentioned it, but yeah.
Yeah, the PFC doesn't contribute any cash. Or what we contribute, I mean, we do contribute monetarily by way of a tax exemption on a yearly basis, right? So if you say the taxes would have been $500,000 a year, it's the view of the PFC and the HFC that's your contribution, and that's a perpetual kind of thing as long as we're in the deal, right? But up front, we don't contribute any cash. So it's purely the developer's responsibility to get the financing together, whether that's going to be a LUTTF execution or if it's going to be financed conventionally. We leave it up to them because they're the experts in their field. They have their relationships with their banking partners and their equity partners. I just can't do everything, right? There's only so much you can do. And so that's where the partnership comes in, and that's where it becomes so valuable, because you have people who are good at what they do and have these connections and this ability to get financing. And so we utilize that to the best of our abilities. Total cost, I'd have to look that up.
Yeah.
But
So it's a tax abatement, not necessarily part of the initial capital stack, but it factors in over the long
right,
term. Yeah.
correct.
Great. And Mark responded that he's got it. So just one more comment here in our chat from Don Rains. He's assuming that being these near DART stations, we could potentially reduce the parking demand from typical developments. I know that may be something that's completely separate from the PFC, the parking ratio.
Right. I mean, that's kind of a zoning question, you know, and
Yeah.
obviously it helps if you say, hey, we're partnering with the CFC on this. This is kind of a city-supported initiative. You know, you probably get the zoning a little easier. Maybe not, though, depending on the city. You know, those planning commissioners can be a little tricky sometimes. But, you know, if at the end of the day, it's a well-located project, for the most
Yeah.
part, everybody does their job and make sure we get the best projects we can get financed.
For sure. And I have one more quick question, which I think we kind of already addressed. Luis asked about the the net present value of the PFC, which would, I guess, so we're talking, what is it, a 60-year, 50-year? It's very long terms, these abatements, right?
Yeah, so I guess initially, before the law was changed last year, PFCs, they would do a 75-year lease term. And that's just because cities had expressed a desire not to just give kind of an unlimited tax abatement. They wanted to kind of have an option to go and revisit that. Now with the new law, they're limited to 60 years on new development and I think 30 years on any kind of acquisition rehab. But the leases are still, I think they're still set up as 75-year leases with the bank. That's pretty much the minimum term all of the banks would accept as a financing mechanism. I mean, they have to have something tangible so that they know, you know, what their financing is going to be there long enough to get it paid off, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, I don't know, the question here, the calculated PFC contribution via abatement. I mean, our abatement really is those taxes every year. That's
And that might
normally the highest.
escalate as values increase over time.
Well, that's kind of the convention, right? Your taxes pretty much increase every year across the board.
Yeah.
Now, how
So
much?
it would be a
it's hard to
guess.
say, but
Yeah.
yeah, we try to
It's a
do our
lot,
best.
it sounds like,
And,
though, if you're, so.
yeah, you know, in terms of your operating costs, your taxes are usually the highest one in Texas.
Yeah.
It's a pretty significant chunk of your operating costs. So if we can totally take that out, it allows you to implement some affordability. And so that's kind of where we think, you know, it's a really good use of taxpayer dollars, you know, where it pretty much goes directly back to the citizens in form of rent reduction. And so for me, it's something that's easy to get behind.
Great. Well, Aaron, I think this is a fascinating topic, and I do want to keep the conversation going potentially here, but I want to make sure I give some time for our folks from the city of Austin and Fort Worth to share what they've got going on. So thank you for sticking around and responding to the feedback, and we might rehash this as we get into sort of shared conversation. So if you'll hang on now, I'm going to bring up Lucy Hall, from the city of Austin, which has, I know, reduced parking requirements, I think reduced minimum lot sizes, advanced equitable, TOD, a lot of good stuff going on in Austin. So thanks for joining us up here in North Texas to talk about what y'all are learning and doing there.
Yeah, thanks for having us. My name is Lucy Hall. I'm a planner in the planning department at the city of Austin. I'm on the Equitable Transit Oriented Development or ETOD team. As Travis mentioned, I'm here to talk about some recent amendments to our land development code to support transit and housing capacity, including affordable housing in Austin. As you likely know, since mandating affordable housing in private development isn't an option in Texas, we focus our efforts on amendments to the land development code that include density bonus programs and that generally increase housing capacity. I'm also joined by Jordan Feldman and Alan Panny, if y'all want to come on camera and give a wave. They are the leads over our two teams that case manage and lend analysis support to our land development code amendment process. They were originally supposed to be back at City Council today, continuing the code amendment grind, which is why I'm presenting on their hard work, but their item was postponed. So fortunately for us, they were able to join at the last minute. They'll be happy to jump in and help with questions at the end. Yeah, thanks for having us here. Really excited to share about our spring 2024 code amendments. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So first I want to acknowledge that even with Jordan and Alan here, this still only represents a fraction of the folks that worked on this. It was a huge group effort, both within our department and interdepartmentally, which you'll pick up on. So we'll start first with the Equitable Transit Oriented Development, or ETOD overlay, home phase 2. Then we'll go to downtown parking modifications, and then citywide compatibility changes, which weren't specifically requested as part of this presentation, but I wanted to just touch on them. We'll talk about some lessons learned from each, and then throughout the entirety of this process, since this was all sort of one big package. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about our future transit and housing supportive work. All right, you can go to the next slide. Oh, I think there was, oh yeah, there we go. So I also just want to provide some background. City Council has directed staff to work on upwards of 40 land development code amendments at any time. So often we have to prioritize. So why did City Council initiate these particular code amendments? Some as late as February for May 2024 adoption. All right, you can go to the next slide. And the answer to that is Project Connect. Project Connect is a generational transit investment approved by Austin voters in 2020. You can see it visualized on the map there. It includes the introduction of light rail, which is visualized through phase 1 in yellow, phase 1, what are called priority extensions in gray and yellow, and then future alignments in light gray. It also includes the expansion of our existing commuter rail, which is in red, and the creation of another commuter rail line in green, and also the expansion of our bus rapid transit system, that's in purple. And all of that is operated by our transportation authority, Capital Metro. So funding for phase 1, again, that's the part in yellow of this project, will come from the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Improvement Grants program called New Starts. This grant program has an initial scoring deadline of August of this year. And part of that scoring criteria looks at what they call economic development, which are plans and policies in place today that can shape transit supportive and housing capacity growth in the future. So these code amendments work to improve that score, and getting them on the books before the August deadline was crucial for keeping that contract with Austin voters and delivering on the vision of Project Connect. All right, you can go to the next slide. So the first code amendment we'll start with is the ETOD overlay. This was a geography-specific zoning district that applies to non-single family zoned areas that are located a half mile from that Austin Light Rail Phase 1, which was again that portion in yellow on the previous slide, and priority extensions, which was the gray and yellow portion. This is to allow for denser development along the transit line, as well as income-restricted affordable housing. It also included a city-initiated rezoning of the land areas in dark blue on that slide. The overlay consists of 2 parts, one being the ETOD overlay combining district, or ETOD, which is a restrictive combining district. Its purpose is to decrease the presence of non-transit supportive land uses by making some prohibited and others conditional. And then the other piece of the ETOD overlay is the density bonus program called Density Bonus ETOD, or DB-ETOD, whose purpose is to preserve and create affordable housing opportunities in exchange for certain entitlements. Those entitlements include increasing the maximum building height up to 120 feet in some cases. It modifies various site development standards, including compatibility, and it supersedes more restrictive regulations that might be on the ground related to their current zoning. And it allows residential uses where they previously may not have been allowed. In exchange for these entitlements, it requires affordable housing. In some cases, provides redevelopment protections for certain existing residents and businesses, and has higher mixed-use building design standards. All right, you can go to the next slide. So here's the complete list of prohibited and conditional uses under ETOD, which is again that restrictive combining district. I won't go through all of these, but I'll just say to come up with this list, staff analyzed national best practices and chose uses that typically use large amounts of land for parking and low density development, or create unsafe or otherwise uninteresting environments that generally lack or decrease pedestrian activity. We also have electric vehicle charging on here, which was a part of another land development code amendment. So that's a new use. All right, you can go to the next slide. So that was the first piece of the ETOD overlay, which was ETOD, the restrictive combining district. This is the density bonus district called DB ETOD, which offers additional entitlements in exchange for the provision of affordable housing. So in order to use DB ETOD, a developer would be required to adhere to the following affordability requirements, which are distinguished based on whether a developer is providing ownership or rental units in their project, which that is left to their discretion. I won't go into detail about these in the interest of time. I'd be happy to answer questions about them later or after the presentation. But we'll note that the rental requirements were modeled after existing density bonus programs in the absence of time to conduct a thorough calibration, which will come in a phase 2 of the overlay anticipated for spring of 2025. I'll also note that the developer has the option to reduce the affordability requirements by 2% if transit supportive infrastructure is provided. All right, you can go to the next slide. So I mentioned that the density bonus program under the ETOD overlay was not calibrated due to time constraints. So because of this, we modeled the program off of existing density bonus programs. So a major lesson here was learning from and leveraging those in the absence of time. Coordination with our housing department was key here, both to mirror those standards, but also ensure we weren't creating a density bonus program that was the same as existing ones or that would have no uptake and would result in the cannibalization of other programs and hurt our affordability goals. In phase 2, we'll have an opportunity to calibrate the bonus program that will apply to additional areas in the Project Connect system. And then that brings me to our final lesson here, which, because we're doing a phase 2, it was also important to have a system in place of capturing feedback so that we can incorporate it in later phases. All right, next slide. Thank you. So the next code amendment is home phase 2. So as I mentioned, the ETOD overlay only applied to non-single family zoned areas. This is largely because home was in the works at the same time, which applies only to single family zoned lots. So home, which stands for Home Options for Middle Income Empowerment, phase 2, builds off of home phase 1, which council passed in December and allowed up to 3 units on single family lots. Home phase 2 then reduced the minimum lot size required for those single family lots. The new minimum lot size in these zones is now 1,800 square feet, down from 5,750, which makes Austin now with the smallest minimum lot size for single family homes of large cities in Texas after Houston. For reference, Dallas generally has a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size. In line with what was passed in home phase 1, these changes apply to the vast majority of single family neighborhoods across Austin. And the changes include restrictions on height and unit size to incentivize smaller, more affordable units. Development standards like minimum lot width and setbacks were reduced to allow additional flexibility in housing types, including the option for flag lots or attached townhomes or row houses. All right, you can go to the next slide. So those unit size restrictions I mentioned are as follows. Homes are allowed to have 1650 square feet of floor space or 0.55 FAR, whichever is greater. Homes can't exceed 2,300 square feet, and these unit size limits only apply in the central city. You can go to the next slide. And here are the adopted site development regulations compared to the requirements that apply to larger lots. I won't go through all of these, but I'll just highlight some to, I'll highlight that there's a 10-foot front setback compared to the typical 25-foot front setback, as well as the allowance for 0-foot setbacks between small lots to allow townhouse and row home development. You can go to the next slide. There might be some animations on, yeah, there they are. Okay, so some lessons learned in home phase 2. With it being a citywide change to single family zoning, we had numerous interdepartmental meetings to coordinate the proposed changes and ensure every department knew what was being proposed. Despite our best attempts to meet early and often, there were still some items that came up at the last minute between departments that needed coordination and updates to the proposals. All right, you can go to the next slide. So the city also undertook an effort to incentivize transit supportive land uses downtown. Currently, many projects were providing too much parking, which disincentivizes the use of transit, walking, and biking. It's also one of the biggest areas of weakness in our FTA grant application. So we created new regulations to require and incentivize less parking downtown. You can go to the next slide. So these new regulations include lowering the existing maximum parking requirements. The maximum was previously 110% of the minimum parking requirements, and now it's 80%. While Austin no longer has parking minimums, or has minimum parking requirements rather, the minimum parking requirements table was used to calculate maximum parking requirements. Regulations also included lowering the existing soft parking cap from 60% of the previous minimum to 40%, and adding a set of conditions that would allow developers to exceed the soft parking cap, which include locating the excess parking underground, sharing parking with other buildings, potential for conversion of parking into occupiable space, or if the parking is rented or sold separately from the building space or decoupled, developers can also pay a fee to exceed the soft cap. Phase 2 of the downtown parking modifications, which will be considered by council next year, will include parking when calculating FAR. Downtown has the maximum FAR, so this change would incentivize other uses instead of parking. Next slide. So the primary lesson learned from this code amendment was that working with downtown stakeholders to review options and develop the draft allowed us to create a proposal that was acceptable to everyone while still moving the needle a little further towards lowering those parking maximums. While it could have been more aggressive, what was adopted should be successful at removing the most egregious offenders and encouraging more underground parking and improving parking utilization. Next slide. So this is our last code amendment that I'll talk about. Austin also overhauled its compatibility standards, which limits the height of buildings depending on their location in relation to single family homes. The old compatibility standards had been in place since the 80s and were among the most restrictive in the country. They also extended 540 feet from a triggering property. They imposed significant constraints on development, including multifamily mixed-use development, especially along transit corridors. We estimated, in fact, that the city was losing about 80,000 units of housing capacity due to these compatibility restrictions. So the adopted changes greatly reduced the impact of compatibility at a high level. The changes were ending compatibility at 75 feet from single-family homes, compared to the previous 540 and allowing greater heights within those 75 feet. The diagram at the bottom shows those previous distances and height allowances at the top, and then the new distance requirements and height allowances at the bottom. So these requirements come with new buffer and screening requirements to help with privacy concerns. Changes also included limiting where and how compatibility applies, so that just a property zoned single family with 1 to 3 homes triggers compatibility. and only higher intensity zones and land uses are subject to compatibility. The map to the right shows areas where compatibility applies now versus where it applied under previous regulations. And then finally, the goal was to simplify a set of regulations that was very complex and hard to administer. You can go to the next slide. So this is the last compatibility slide. It just summarizes the housing capacity analysis we did as part of the compatibility code amendment. Housing capacity here refers to a projection of how many housing units could be built if every property were to develop or redevelop under existing zoning regulations. The old compatibility regulations reduced housing capacity by 82,000 units, and the adopted changes unlocked 83% of that, or 63,000 units. And we're looking forward to seeing how changes to compatibility could work together with the other code amendments I just mentioned to increase housing options and capacity near transit. Next slide. So it was really important with this one to, again, coordinate with the staff members reviewing development applications to ensure that new regulations could be implemented well. Site plan reviewers helped us understand what wasn't working with the old regulations and gave us really good feedback on what should change. Additionally, we conducted a peer city study. If you do the same, be sure to double check data towards the end of the project or put some sort of caveat or note that data may have changed. In our case, our analysis ended up containing erroneous data at one point because regulations had changed between when we first compiled the data and when our materials became public. Next slide. All right, I just have 2 more slides here. So as you may have picked up on, the overarching lesson from all of the code amendments was coordination. Leverage the knowledge and the subject matter experts you have at your organization and involve them early and often. As I mentioned earlier as well, this was a lot of code amendments to take on at once, and we also have 40 plus others on the docket at any given time. And having a complete staff to manage all of these is crucial. Just 2 years ago, we had 0 or maybe 0.5 staff dedicated to just land development code amendments, despite their initiation not slowing down. Now we have 2 teams headed by Jordan and Alan. They've done a really great job at streamlining the process, so we know exactly what steps are required to develop and adopt the code amendment and can provide a reliable timeline, which helps maintain good relationships with both council and the public. I would say as well, know that updates to code amendments will be necessary, so keep that in mind as you develop initial regulations. And as I mentioned previously, due to the FTA scoring timeline, this was a compressed process with just 2 months to develop much of these regulations, which means it was time and staff intensive. In the future, more time would provide more opportunities to have conversations with the public, or more conversations with the public. If you can, advocate for taking your time with these things. And if you can't get that, be strategic in talking with leadership to create a realistic work program and prioritize what needs to happen first. Make yourself as available as possible to the public. On the right are some screenshots of various efforts we did to communicate these changes. I won't go through all of them just in the interest of time. And finally, take time to train staff on the changes. In earlier days when we lacked staff capacity, this regrettably wasn't always happening, which led to a lot of confusion, but the code teams have since implemented a really great training process, so folks now know how these changes impact their workflows before the changes are actually implemented. Okay, last slide, please. And I know I'm coming up on time here, so I won't go into detail of this, but I'll just note that we have an upcoming analysis and calibration of our existing density bonus programs, some future phases of the code amendments we just went over. We also have some updates upcoming to existing programs and plans, and we have a new zoning district and density bonus program that should be coming online soon in the South Central waterfront area, which is right on the alignment for the phase 1 light rail. All right, and I think that's my last slide. I think the last one just has my, yeah, there we go, my email address.
And you've got some reference slides in here, which we'll make available online. So if you guys want to jump into any of them, I'm happy to do that right now, but just letting everybody else on the call know, we'll be posting this slideshow. So
Awesome,
yeah,
thank you.
thanks, Lucy, for going through the mechanics of those code changes. It's very interesting to see those metrics. And I appreciate your last nugget of the sort of public engagement piece and being available. Various communities in North Texas have also been working on sort of code reform efforts in similar directions. And I know from just observation, there have been very much political challenges with moving towards, let's say, reducing minimum lot sizes or adding infill housing that's of a smaller size. I'm curious, and in North Texas, we're kind of closing on an era of building new transit lines because we've kind of built quite a few transit lines. Was the FTA's sort of requirement, because it sounds like, and I haven't looked at their capital investment grant program lately, are they requiring cities to now consider these things as a condition of that capital investment funding? Was that a lever y'all could use in these changes?
So my understanding as someone who isn't putting the grant application together, so I'm sort of just talking about what I've heard, but I'll do the best that I can here. So from my understanding, it's not a requirement, but it is something that determines both your eligibility for the grant in general and how much funding you're eligible to receive. So ensuring competitiveness there could really sort of open access to more funds for the transit system.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of players in putting together those applications. We do have a question in the chat here. Are y'all able to see that question from Charles?
Yeah, about non-conforming uses. Let's see, I'm reading through it here.
Right.
Yeah, just real quick on the threshold, we actually use 50% of the threshold, or the building has to remain or not be replaced, I guess, in a sense, for rebuilds. So yeah, it's 50% is what we use.
Yep, pretty detailed
Wow.
question there on a redevelopment scenario for
Yeah.
everyone who's trying to follow along here. I'm trying to parse it myself.
We did have special language on our notice that went out for the ETOD. So actually the ETOD amendments had its own notice because of the restriction of the uses, compared to the notice that we use for all the other ones could be grouped kind of into one separate notice. So there's specific language that we had to use from the state in like 14 font, bold, very specific criteria that we had to include limiting when limiting uses or notifying people about that.
And this is for your overlay, which that corridor where the ETOD overlay is, I'm somewhat familiar with Austin. It seems like it's already a pretty built up corridor, right? So these are a lot of existing properties. What was the engagement like on that? Are these landowners corridor that's interested in continued redevelopment?
Yeah, so sorry, I actually realized there was a piece of the question that we didn't get to, but let me just address that quickly.
Sorry.
About no, it's totally fine. About non-conforming uses. So in terms of, I guess, dealing with them, as Alan mentioned, we included language in the notices, but also we don't have any plans to do anything with them or require that the property owner do anything. They're able to continue maintaining their property if they're designated as a non-conforming use and do any sort of repairs that are required as part of that. And they're also allowed to expand their property to a certain extent. It's really just new projects that those use restrictions apply to. Anything existing can continue to exist. And I'm sorry, Travis, can you repeat your question? I know you asked about, it sort of sounded like two things. One of them, engagement along, what was engagement like? And then also
you kind of answered my question there, because as you mentioned, now that I'm thinking of it, we do have corridors in North Texas where there is a city initiated rezoning, you have an existing use. doesn't really impact the existing user. It's more very future oriented. Yeah, I think that makes sense that you're able to come in with the overlay and not change a whole lot unless there's, again, a redevelopment in progress. So that would make it easier for the existing stakeholders to not be as alarmed.
Yeah, exactly. Although we did still get folks who were alarmed, and which, to be fair, the language in the notice was required by the state to sound pretty alarming. So
That's
but
interesting nuance.
once we had
Yeah.
conversations with folks, though, it was they seemed to understand and be more
Hence,
relieved.
making yourself available. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the tricky things with the notice is the required language is quite alarming. There, as much as we try to clarify in the notice that it isn't making them change their current use, people obviously become alarmed when they get a notice like that. And so making ourselves available is very important.
Good to know. All right, so I see Charles also responded to that conversation. Well, if we don't have any more questions out there from our North Texas folks, I see Mark had a question, but I believe that was related to something from Aaron, so I think we can get to that later on. Lucy and Alan, thanks for presenting the Austin information. Wait, let me see if we get another question here. Yeah, Mark mentioned that was for Aaron. So if you guys will hang out, I'm going to bring up our folks from Fort Worth, Amy and Mary Margaret. Let me just go through these reference slides, which we will have on our website. Oop, went too far. We're going to have Amy and Mary Margaret talk about a project in Fort Worth, East Fort Worth, an area where the region, the city have invested in transportation resources, and now the Fort Worth Housing Solutions is doing a great mixed-use project. So I think, Amy, you want to get us started on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Amy Connolly, Assistant Director in Neighborhood Services for the City of Fort Worth. And joining me is Mary Margaret Lemons, who is the President and CEO of Fort Worth Housing Solutions, which is the city's housing authority and our great partner. So we're really excited to talk to you today about a project that you may not think about as transit oriented, but really is based around redevelopment along the Rosedale Avenue corridor, which is certainly a very well-used bus corridor in the city of Fort Worth. This is a land use plan that we engaged upon to redevelop the former Cavill Place public housing site in East Fort Worth. It was began after the region invested significantly in Rosedale Avenue street improvements, which added medians and parkway improvements to the corridor and intersection improvements. And as part of this project, there will eventually be a transit facility located within this particular development. We've got a grant, we just haven't figured out how to use it, but we're working on it. So the idea behind this is to replace the outdated and dysfunctional public housing development with a brand new neighborhood, of mixed income neighborhood, to create a variety and types of housing types, and to allow the residents that were displaced as part of this redevelopment to come back to the neighborhood to live again. And this is definitely a City of Fort Worth and a Fort Worth Housing Solutions partnership. City has committed money and time, but Fort Worth Housing Solutions is the lead on this, so they've done most of the work. So I'll let Mary Margaret take the slides from here and kind of go through the redevelopment proposal, and we can talk about money and all of that after that. She's got a stretch to turn on.
My lights go out if I sit too long, and so this is as long as I sit normally. But hi, thanks for having us housers on your transportation call, and it's always nice to see where we can intersect in doing good things for the community. You can go ahead and advance the slide. Thanks, Amy, for the intro. I'll give you guys a little bit of information about how we got to where we are today. So the Stop 6 is a neighborhood in East Fort Worth off Rosedale, like Amy said. It's named, you might wonder why it's called Stop 6, but it's got its name from the interurban rail car that used to go from Fort Worth to Dallas back in the 20s. And so it was the sixth stop on that rail car, and the name stuck. And so it's a historically African-American community that it has a really strong community, a sense of community pride, and lots of longtime residents that really came together really in 2013 as the city and the Housing Authority wanted to look at a transformation plan. And unfortunately, that plan didn't have enough funding to make any big moves. And so we dusted it off in 2019 and got all the community together. We had over 100 in-person focus groups before COVID, if you can imagine, talking to residents of our housing at the Housing Authority, but also single family homes, the churches, schools, anybody and everybody that touches this neighborhood, and updated that plan and submitted it to HUD as a Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant application. And so we were lucky enough to be one of 4 awarded. We actually won our award right after the pandemic hit in April of 2020. So this has all been done kind of through Zoom and Teams and all of these wonderful tools that we're now used to, but it was a new world for us back then when we were early grantees. You can see the boundaries. It's a 2-mile area that's our neighborhood on that map, and 925 units will replace the former 300 unit housing development that we had. But we do have multiple sites, so we'll go through that on the next slide. So the grant, HUD awards these grants. They've been doing this for about a decade, maybe 12 years now. They award these grants with 3 pillars in mind: people, housing, and neighborhood. And so this is the successor of a program called the Hope 6 program that HUD administered decades ago, that really just focused on the housing and the people, and it didn't concern the surrounding neighborhood. And so now the grant is split up with 70% of the grant funding required to go to housing, 15% goes for case management for residents of public housing, and 15% goes back into the neighborhood to make sure that we're supporting economic development and the neighborhood can be sustainable in the future. So this is kind of the phase with the a schedule for the transformation, but your original grant of $35 million was supposed to have a 6-year lifespan, so we have to use it all within 6 years. We were able to get an additional grant of $5 million, and so we have a couple of extra years tacked on to the end. And so you see, we expect to spend all of HUD's money by 2028, but I am certain we will still have work to do in the neighborhood. Here's just a few milestones that we've been able to accomplish. So obviously winning the grant, demolishing the old public housing, and then designing the first phase, which happens to be a senior phase, Cowan Place. And then we were able to get HUD to approve our community, critical community improvements. So that's a partnership between the city and the Housing Authority that will use some of the grant funding for ground floor commercial in a mixed use building, as well as a food truck and farmers market pavilion within the neighborhood, as well as a facade improvement program. So we were excited to get that approval, and we're working hard to spend all of HUD's money on those things. And then really proud of the city and their bond program from 2020. It's the 2022 bond. They were able to get a brand new community center for our neighborhood. And so it'll be adjacent to the affordable housing with recreation, a library, police substation, as well as an aquatic center. And that's something that this neighborhood hasn't seen really ever. So excited to get started and break ground on that new community center as well. And we have the end of 2021, we were able to get our final design for the second phase of housing approved as well. In 2022, we were really excited to get a set aside by TDHCA down in Austin for housing tax credits related to choice awards. And so In the 9% round, it's super competitive. And for years, San Antonio was the only awardee in the state, and they were not able to get us set aside. But we were able to talk to our friends down there and figure out a way to prioritize affordable housing in these neighborhoods that were distressed. We thought it was really important to talk about aligning both our local resources at the city level with obviously the federal grant, but then not leaving the state out so they could be a part of all the good work that's happening. And so we've benefited from 3 9% awards since that has taken place. We expect one next week at the board meeting on Thursday. We're on the list, and so we feel good about it. We've also been able to utilize some other federal funding through congressional earmarks. So Mark Vesey's office has awarded us over $8 million to add to the capital stack to get these projects across the finish line. It's very complicated and challenging to find the funding to fill all the gaps that pop up. And we have used a lot of resources. I think we have a slide that'll be pretty impressive here in a minute. We did celebrate the grand opening of the first phase last November, and it is a fully occupied 174 unit, beautiful senior living project. So this is it. That's Cowan Place. Like I said, it's 174 units designed exclusively for seniors over 62 years of age. And you can see the breakdown of the bedroom, mainly 1 bedrooms with a few 2 bedrooms, and you can see the affordability there. In every phase of housing, we have units reserved for returning Cavill Place residents using project-based vouchers, as well as 5% of the units dedicated to permanent supportive housing for our individuals exiting homelessness. And our development partner on the entire grant is McCormick Baron Salazar. And our people partner who do our case management work with our residents is Urban Strategies. You can go to the next one. These are just a few more pictures. You can see it's a really nice property. Gorgeous. It has that tower of light. That was really something that our architects worked hard on to say hello if you're coming from 820 in the east, exiting Rosedale there off the highway. You know it when you see it, and it actually brought a view to Stop 6. So we can see all the way to Jerry World over in Dallas from that pillar of light there in the corner. And then you get a good shot there of our mural on our staircase with our interurban rail car. So the second, and I'll just tell you, I don't know if somebody's going to ask this question, but the total development cost for Cowan Place was $43 million. The second phase is named after Coach Robert Hughes. And so you can see him there at the groundbreaking last summer. We were delighted that he was able to join us, and we're sad that he has since passed, but we're really excited to honor the legacy in Stop 6 that he created of community and excellence. So you can go ahead and continue. Hughes House is 162 units. This is the mixed use and mixed income neighborhood I was talking about that has the ground floor commercial. Approximately 7,000 square feet of commercial space will be available for neighborhood businesses. We don't have a sit-down restaurant in the neighborhood, and so we're excited to get that started. And it is under construction and on schedule, so we will deliver these units next spring. This is a site plan. It faces Rosedale and it's at the hard corner of Amanda. And there is transit stops directly in front of this property as well. You can continue. You can see the breakdown here of the bedrooms and the rents and the affordability, which may be too much detail for you guys. I don't know. It's coming out of the ground nicely. We're excited to see it in reality. You can keep going here. And this is just a lot of detail on where we are in construction. It's has been challenging to meet all the place and service deadlines that come along with 9% tax credits just due to supply chain issues. So that is one of the issues with affordable housing right now is some of the sources have some pretty hard and fast deadlines attached to them as far as place and service. Otherwise, you lose out and your investors get a little bit scared of the IRS calling back the tax credits. You can continue here. This is the most interesting part of it. We had about 13 different funding sources to close this gap. And you can see that there's just a lot of players involved. So obviously we had some loans and our CNI money, but then the city of Fort Worth came to the table in a big way with the PSH money, as well as home, UDAG, and let's see, the next slide may have, I think, the final.
Yeah, there were also fee waivers, and they're in a
ARPA.
neighborhood empowerment zone. So we figured we've probably invested, almost 800,000 in recent years and just fee waivers for this project.
Yes. So we also were able to utilize some of the ARPA money, both from the city and the county, for this project as well. And so the total investment there is, you can see $60 million. You can go on to the next slide. Our third phase of housing is Babers Manor. It's actually slated to close in the next couple of weeks. And this is an 80-unit community that will have a combination of garden-style apartments and townhomes to serve our larger family style. So there will be a good number of 3 and 4 bedrooms here. And you can tell from this slide is a little bit outdated because we were supposed to close a little bit earlier. And we're just, like Erin said, these things are complicated and it takes people that have a little bit of stick with it to get it done. And we're trying to be those people right now. So. And this is really, adjacent to single family neighborhood. And so we're trying to kind of reconnect it to the streets. So it flows nicely and feels more like a single family development as you drive through with landscaping and sidewalks and, safety for the residents there. And so the townhomes are the ones that are closest to single family, and the garden style are up on the main road at Remy Avenue. And here's the mix there. It is right across the street from a city park, as well as the East Side Boys and Girls Club. So there's some really nice amenities just within a few steps of this new development. And so we took a different approach than a lot of cities did. Just to back up for a second, most cities tear down public housing and rebuild just on the public housing site. We actually had been land banking land in the community for about 10 years, and we were able to spread out the units into multiple developments kind of at each corner of the neighborhood, because we wanted the entire neighborhood to come up with us. And so from the west side, we have a parcel of land that we can develop. From the east side, you have Cowan Place. The heart of it is Hughes House, and this is on the southern border. So, and it really has, Amy can speak to all of the single family home development that the city has seen there, but the permitting in that neighborhood has gone way up, and the dollar amount per square foot for the houses that are being built there now it's mind blowing. 10 years, if you had told me that houses would be sold for $300,000 in this neighborhood, I would have fallen out of my chair, because we were buying houses for, under $10,000 in that neighborhood.
Yeah, it's truly been transformational, both the city's investments in our neighborhood improvement strategy for that neighborhood and the significant investment that HUD and the Fort Worth Housing Solutions have made have totally changed the entire dynamic in that neighborhood. So we're now seeing, not just affordable housing being built, but we're seeing some significantly larger homes and people moving back to the neighborhood that have been really successful in life and wanted to return back home. It's pretty neat.
You can keep going there. So we are working right now on Hughes House 2, which is on Cabell, the old public housing land, and it'll be adjacent to that neighborhood hub that the city's building. And so this is will be the largest phase of development, with just about 300 units there. both a combination of the garden style and townhome again, with its own pool and splash pad, dog parks, lots of green space. And you see that dark green kind of wavy walkway. That is a walking trail that we're going to continue throughout the neighborhood. And so we're excited to get this one started, and we'll have, I think, 3 things under construction all at the same time. And this is Hughes House 3. So this will be much like Hughes House 1 in the style of development, elevator buildings that are on the Rosedale frontage, and 78 units, 3 stories. And we're in the process right now of getting our RFQs for both the general contractor and investors set up. So this is actually the one that we'll get the tax credit award for next week. We can probably skip this, but we do try to hire from the neighborhood and support people with jobs on the site. And so our goal is 25% and a targeted goal of 5%. And we are meeting both of those goals at this point on the entire phase project. Okay, we're 0.6% off on that one, sorry, but we're almost there. I'm sure it's in progress. So, and then Amy, I don't know if you want to talk about the hub.
Yeah, just quickly, the city of Fort Worth and its 2022 bond offering was successful in having the voters approve a neighborhood hub for Stop 6 that includes a brand new community center replacing the existing Martin Luther King Community Center, and a brand new aquatics facility. And this is a neighborhood that hasn't probably ever had an aquatics facility of any sort. So this is really groundbreaking. So we're just finishing up the programming, crossing our fingers and hoping that we can start going to design on that very soon. Next slide. And then
So
we're
really
also,
yeah,
go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. This is you.
The reason we argue about this is not argue, but we both are very invested in the neighborhood improvements that we're trying to make, which are called critical community improvements by the Choice Neighborhood Projects. And one thing that we wanted to do early on was to create some kind of community center where neighbors could come and connect together, you know, the third place, not work, not home, but a third place where they could connect. And we had proposed a food truck or a farmer's market canopy that we had originally thought, well, we'll just put it in the parking lot of the new community center. Well, you know, we decided that wouldn't quite work. Luckily, Mary Margaret and her friends connected in with CVS Pharmacy, and we are looking at repurposing the original Boys and Girls Club in this neighborhood to a workforce innovation and training center that will also have a food truck, canopy, farmer's market. We'll also have the Tarrant Area Food Bank in there, who will be providing classes and demonstrations on cooking, as well as a urban garden. So we think this is going to be like the new center of our community. And there's some slides kind of showing at it. It's going to be called At the Six. And we envision that this will be like a brand new, it's not really a community center per se, it's more of a meeting gathering place for the community as well as training.
Yeah, it's a placemaking opportunity. So I think you go to the next slide.
Yeah.
That's our logo, but I can go on beyond that. Yeah, so CVS, the workforce training that they do is primarily for pharmacy techs as well as like store employees. And so they build a mock pharmacy and train there for both store positions of like managers and stockists and clerks and all those things. And then the pharmacy, you actually graduate with a pharmacy tech certificate, and everything is there and functioning like a real store. So it's not open to the public to buy goods, but it's a workforce opportunity for our neighborhood, and everything is free and open to the entire community.
Next slide. So these are some pictures, exterior pictures and renderings of what we think are our new Workforce Innovation Training Center and At the Six will look like. So we're planning on some really beautiful murals. The urban garden you can see there on the right. Next slide. outdoor patio seating and doors that will open up from the interior to the exterior. And then you can also see that we'll have canopies with food trucks that will also not just be food trucks, but we can deliver also a lot of medical services by that'll come in through RVs or food truck like structures, so we could do mobile mammograms or blood drives or you name it. Even dentistry can be done this way. So we're excited to be delivering some new services to the community as well.
So this area, we envision holding things like back to school events, free haircuts, movie nights. And so we wanted a name that could be used in a variety of ways. So think of farmers market at the Sixth, movie night at the Sixth, all those different things that we can do to really bring the community together with a safe place to gather. And I do want to mention, we do have $1 million that we were able to receive through COG to be able to do some transportation planning. And we're working with the city and Trinity Metro on a mobility plan for the neighborhood to make sure that we include all types of transit in the new development. And so we're looking at rerouting buses and on-demand services and all those things. And so we do have a little bit of extra land to be able to play with and make sure that we include transportation as part of the transformation of this neighborhood.
Great. I'm glad you ended there, Mary Margaret, with the transportation sort of connection for the neighborhood, because y'all are, it looks like, transforming an entire neighborhood. The scale of the project is pretty large after we covered all those individual components. And I think my question for you all is, so thinking about the transportation connection, the urban design, you mentioned Rosedale, you're going to have taller buildings. It looks like what I would call more of a walkable context than sort of the 1950s public housing that had more of a garden setting. Was that intentional? And were you guys at Housing Solutions in the city sort of driving that? Have there been anybody that's not been on board with that vision? Has that been a big part of the thought here?
A lot of this goes back to equity, and the east side of Fort Worth has been lacking investment from the city and others for decades. And so I was really proud when the city recognized that and really said yes. We had not been able to get to yes previously. And so in 2018 and 2019, the city really stepped up and said, we're your partner. And then from that, everybody said yes. The residents said it's time, all the nonprofits, for-profits. We actually raised $1 million of private funding to start planning the community center before the bond was even approved. And so we got the buy-in from the community very early on, and we do a lot of community outreach to keep them updated on where we are on the plan. So we really haven't had community detractors. We've had a lot of questions, which are great. And we've had some various opinions, but we're always able to figure out middle ground to get to yes, which I'm proud of. And I know that that's not common all across the country or even within our state. So Amy, I don't know if you want to give city's perspective on that, but that's how I kind of see it.
Well, certainly the Hughes House development is sort of the most emblematic of sort of a mixed use development, walkable area. We are really working hard to try to bring back Amanda Avenue as a center of commerce. It at one time was the place where you got your hair cut and where you went out to eat and where you connected in with your neighbors in this neighborhood. And over time, all of that was sort of lost. And there's not hardly any commercial structures on that street anymore. So the idea would be that we'll try to work really hard to reestablish, doing hardcore community economic development to reestablish Amanda Avenue as a thriving place where people can walk and can have a restaurant meal and can have some shopping. It's 7,000 square feet isn't a lot to do, but when we were doing our market analysis, that's about all that we could really support. And so what we're trying to do is start small, bring back Amanda Avenue. And then over time, we think that it will spur more commercial development, hopefully along Amanda Avenue. We'd prefer that it go down Amanda Avenue as opposed to spreading out in an automobile centric way along Rosedale.
Yeah, absolutely. That you mentioned the 7,000 square feet market support. It's sort of you guys are creating a new market, if you will, through the public
Yeah.
investment.
Yes.
Very, very cool. Because yeah, we know these sort of projects, like you mentioned, can be challenging to do these neighborhood turnarounds in our region. Well, thank you guys for that great presentation and showing all the effort that the city and the Fort Worth Housing Solutions are doing together. We're wrapping up now our panel discussion, and I'm not sure if we still have everybody who was part of the panel on here, but I guess you guys from Fort Worth are welcome to jump in on this. Do we see sort of affordable, well-located housing in North Texas continuing to occur? Challenging capital stacks for sure. But I think there are several tools like, PFCs, I guess housing finance corporations now, as Aaron mentioned, are available. Are you guys optimistic that we're going to see more of those in Fort Worth where they need to be?
I am. I mean, we have, I think, 11 projects under construction right now. We utilize the PFC program here in Fort Worth, as well as tax credits. And so we don't see the market slowing. I think we just have to be more creative in figuring out how to get them all closed. But we're very lucky that we work hand in hand with the city on just about everything we do. Even though necessary city approval is not required on some of the transactions we can do, we still go and engage with council people and neighborhoods and city staff to make sure that we're on the same page and we're trying to achieve the same thing. The city recently put out an affordable housing plan and neighborhood conservation strategy, and we recently aligned our strategic plan, our 5-year strategic plan, to really work together to make sure that we're moving in concert, and when developers come to Fort Worth, that they find it easy to do business with us and want to come back again and again. So I'm feeling optimistic about it. I know that we're pushing a huge boulder up a hill, but we're still going to keep at it.
Yeah, and I'll just say that in the city of Fort Worth, I think the Housing Authority, Fort Worth Housing Solutions, and the city work really closely together in ways that you just don't see in other cities. The city itself doesn't do PFC financing, but Fort Worth Housing Solutions is able to use that tool through state law, and they use it very effectively, and we encourage that, right? The Housing Finance Corporation is a tool that the city can use, and we have partnered with many developers to help make projects move forward using all the tools available to HFCs. We also use a lot of our federal funds, like our Home Investment Partnership, or we'll invest in infrastructure using community development block grants. Or we also have neighborhood empowerment zones, which provide waiver of fees and sometimes tax exemptions, depending on the project. So we have a lot of tools in our toolbox, and we just try to figure out how we can, position them to get as much affordable housing built as we can.
Excellent. Yeah, it does take all the tools in the toolbox to address that giant boulder that we face here. I want to make sure we give everybody out there a chance to add questions. I know we have one from Mark that's open. I'm not sure if Aaron's still on the call, but maybe Mary Margaret, it's a technical question you could help with. Which taxing authorities are able to provide abatements within a PFC or an HFC? I believe it would be cities and school districts.
It's everything. So 100% ad valorem tax exemption comes by statute with the PFC, and actually housing authorities and housing finance corporations have that ability as well under their enabling statutes. So, and there's not a time limit on it. I think the PFC code was revised last session, and they put a time limit on acquisitions, but housing authorities and housing finance corporations don't have a time limit on it. And typically our deals are written with 99-year leases for underwriting purposes. So
The city of Fort Worth is doing some investigations now about looking at pilot agreements when housing developments move forward. So perhaps limiting the tax exemption or making a payment in lieu of taxes to one or some or all of the taxing entities. We haven't finished that work yet, but there is always pressure from your city manager's office to make sure that you're protecting and preserving the tax base. And so you're trying to balance that at all times with the need for affordable housing. And so that's what's kind of coming into play right now in the city.
Yeah, very interesting take on that fiscal analysis piece. But definitely the added density and other activity can potentially be helpful for sure. All right. Well, we are closing in on our 2-hour mark here. So Amy, Mary Margaret, I really appreciate you guys answering those questions and giving us that take on things and all your efforts in Fort Worth. Much appreciated.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So I think we've had a great panel discussion here, talking about the whole gamut of how we support affordable housing and transit, especially the financing tools, the policy, zoning, land use tools, getting at some of the programmatic aspects, and that connection to transportation that we'd like to see. So that wraps up our discussion on housing and transit. But we have a few quick announcements that we think you all need to know. So I'm going to turn it over to Sydney to share those.
All right, thanks, Travis. Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney Mangini, and if you don't know me, I'm a senior transportation planner. I work here at COG. I work with Sean and Travis. And just to wrap up with a couple of quick announcements, we have our round 4 of Blue Green Gray application for New Ideas funding initiative open at this time. This is a funding initiative that involves projects that are related to blue, green, gray, which is water, environmental, and transportation infrastructure. So this funding initiative is open to anyone from an individual to a government agency, private consulting firms, universities, you have it. You name it, you can apply. The call opened actually on July 15th, so this past Monday, and it will close on August 16th. And applications will be due in hand by 5 p.m. that day at our offices here in Arlington. The total funding for this initiative is $250,000 of RTC local with no local match required. And we anticipate awarding around 3 projects. If you're interested in applying or you have more, or you'd like more information about this program, we have a QR code available here, and all of our application materials are available on our website, which is also linked on this slide. We'll also include this in our follow-up email. Next slide, please. We also have a couple of announcements regarding some upcoming federal grant opportunities. So there's the Safe Streets and Roads for All, or SS4A. Applications for planning and demonstration only projects are due on August 29th. We also have the Reconnecting Communities pilot program, and applications for those are due September 30th. And if you're interested in partnering with COG on some projects within your jurisdictions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Next slide. All right, last but not least, we have some local events from the Texas APA chapter, local chapter coming up. So on July 25th, there will be a discussion with the APA Texas chapter president, Kelly Porter, on building blocks of prosperity. So this will be an event with networking, and I believe Kelly Porter will be discussing how planning professionals can implement their plans to improve quality of life for residents in their respective areas. There's also an interesting panel that you're welcome to check out. And this will take place again on July 25th from 3:30 to 5 p.m. at the Burns McDonnell Building in Fort Worth. Another event on July 26th, APA will be hosting the Elected and Appointed Officials Workshop, which is designed to give an introduction to planning and zoning for newly elected officials or seasoned ones if they need a refresher. So that will take place from 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. on July 26th at Grand Hall at the North Richland Hills Center. Next slide, please. So after today's meeting, all of the slides and the recording will be shared with you via email. They'll also be posted on our website. And our next meeting date actually conflicted with the state APA conference. So we'll be selecting another date for that. It will still be in October, and we'll send a save the date out to you all soon. And next slide, Travis. I think that's it.
That's it. And
Awesome.
Clayton shared a link for the elected appointed officials workshop if you're interested in that, and sending your P&Z staff or other elected officials in your community there. It's a great informative opportunity. Check out that link and let us know if you have questions. We can connect you with those links. I think that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.